right, so for today's lesson, we're looking at adding and subtracting functions in function notation. So function notation is just a notation of naming, a way of naming the function. Usually you'll see it as f of x. Sometimes you'll see g of x, h of x. Depends on how many functions there are. That's the same thing as y. Something they're kind of used to seeing in Algebra 1. So we're going to be looking at how to use this function notation to add and subtract. We will not be doing multiplying and dividing right now. We'll do that later on in the year. So for example here, this says they're giving us two functions. F of x is equal to 3x minus 7 and g of x equals 13 minus 2x. We're just going to be substituting in for these functions the polynomial part. So you can see here this f of x is 3x minus 7 according to this f of x function. So instead of writing f of x, we're just going to write down 3x minus 7. And we are adding to it the g of x function. Well, our g of x is 13 minus 2x. Because we are adding these two together, we don't need to use parentheses to separate the two functions, because we're just going to be adding, which is combining our like terms. So we can see here, we're going to combine our 3x and our negative 2x together. That leaves us with 1x. And again, we don't put a 1 in front of our variable. It's an invisible 1 that's there. We don't have to write it down. If you prefer to write it down, you're more than welcome to do that. Then we have a negative 7 and a positive 13, which is a positive 6. So that means that f of x plus g of x is x plus 6. So we can see here for our operations, anytime you see f plus g of x, that's exactly the same thing as f of x plus g of x. When you see f minus g of x, that's the same as f of x minus, now here's where we want to be careful. I'm going to put parentheses around this g of x, and that's just kind of to help you know that we are going to be needing to use parentheses around that function that we're subtracting, because if we don't put parentheses, we forget that we're subtracting the whole function from f of x and not just the first term. So always put that second term that we're subtracting, that second function, in parentheses. So looking at a couple examples here, we are given f of x equals x squared minus 8x plus 4, g of x equals 4x minus 3, and h of x equals x plus 2. We're going to find the functions that are given. We're going to indicate any restrictions in the domain. In this case, we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just looking at adding and subtracting. We're not going to worry about the domain right now. So this says f plus g of x. So like I said before, that's the same thing as getting our f of x function and adding the g of x function. So looking at my f of x, that is x squared minus 8x plus 4. And then we're going to add to that our g of x, which we can see here is 4x minus 3. So we're using these two here, 4x minus 3. Again, because we are adding, we don't have to worry about parentheses anywhere. We are just going to combine like terms now. Now, if you're ever wondering, where do I start? What do I start adding first? What do I start combining first? We always start with the variable with the largest exponent. In this case, it's this x squared. It's the only x squared, so we're going to write that down first. Then we start with a come down from our exponent, so 1 less than 2 is 1. So that's going to be a negative 8x, and this positive 4x, when we add that together, we get a negative 4x, and then we have a positive 4 and a negative 3. Combine that together, we get a positive 1. So this is in standard form. It's decreasing. Our exponents are decreasing from largest to smallest. So that is the solution. Once you've combined like terms, you should not need to combine again. If you've combined the first time correctly, there should be no reason for you to go and look again to see if there's anything to combine. So this is your solution to the addition of f of x plus g of x. Now looking at number 2, when we're subtracting, now we're going to be subtracting f of x minus, and then our h of x. Now we're looking at not just the f of x, but now this h of x. So when we write this down, we have our x squared minus 8x plus 4 minus, and then in parentheses, we have to put our h of x, x plus 2. Now here, because we do have that subtraction, we're going to need to distribute before we can combine like terms. So when we write this down, we get x squared minus 8x plus 4 minus x minus 2. And now we can combine our like terms, starting with the largest exponent, x squared. And then we have a negative 8x and a negative 1x, which is a negative 9x. And then 4 minus 2 is a positive 2. And that's how we do adding and subtracting in function notation.